Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts thinks the best way to play quarterback is to throw to a spot. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. He's a big Tua fan. Tua fans a little bit angry after last week's offense rankings, although we had the Dolphins. I think Steven had them 4th, which is pretty high. If you guys missed that episode, you can go back and check it out. We are now here to do the other side of the ball to predict the top 10 defenses of 2024. I am joined by a different guest, someone who's been on the podcast before, someone who wears a lot of different hats, one of which is currently backwards. If you are not watching this, it is available on YouTube and also on ESPN2 News, something to that effect. Jon Ledyard, welcome back to the show.
Yes, sorry, Colin Coward. I'm wearing a backwards hat on the show, on the Mina Kimes show, and I'm excited to be here. And sorry, Dolphins fans, you may be a little bit angry after this episode as well. We'll see. I don't know. I can't speak for Mina's rank. I can only speak for mine.
I don't think that Dolphins fans would argue that they belong in the top 10. They're an interesting unit. I'm actually, the first division I'm doing is the AFC East, and I've already started digging into that a little bit because there's so much change, by the way, in the Dolphins defense. That's going to be fun to talk about. We're not here, probably not going to talk about the Dolphins today. Jon, before we get into it, you can catch him in a number of places. I alluded to this. He has a Substack called Audibles and Analytics. He hosts a podcast with also a friend of the show, Ollie Connolly, Home and Home. And you can check him out on Twitter, Jon Ledyard NFL, right? I think you have NFL on
I think it's handle. Ledyard NFL Draft is the handle, but Ledyard, I think you can find me. There's not too many of us out there.
You have big shoes to fill because the episode with Steven Ruiz, I just looked on YouTube. There was about 450 comments, approximately 445 of which were angry. So I don't know if people get as angry about defense. We'll find out. I guess.
People off, so this should work great.
Well, this was interesting because Steven and I had the same teams in different orders. Mm-hmm. I think we will have. If I had to guess right now, we haven't seen each other's lists. I suspect we'll probably have maybe 6 or 7 of the same teams. My feeling in doing this, and I sat for a while with the teams and kind of played with the order, I think there's like 7 teams that are pretty hard to object to, although people certainly will find a way. It was, for me, Jon, the final 2 to 3 spots that I agonized. I kept taking teams out, putting it back in. Was that your experience as well, putting together a list?
Yeah, it's kind of funny to hear you say that, actually. I feel like the first 7 teams I felt pretty confident in, 8 semi-confident, and 9 and 10. I mean, I have probably 10 teams in the next tier that I think will be very one. And I think that's pretty indicative of, I look back over recent years, and obviously this depends on what metric you're using to judge what a top 10 defense actually is. But it seemed pretty fluid, except in cases in which the defensive coordinator was stable and consistently successful, kind of an established top tier defensive coordinator. And that maybe can be said on offense, although there are more innovative young guys coming in and out kind of. And so that's been a little more fluid as to who those top guys maybe are. Even last year, we saw some turnover there. Defensively, there perhaps is some of that. But for the last couple of years, I feel like we've known who the established top guys are. And I think we're going to talk a lot about those established top guys today. And that really seems to be the consistent driving factor behind which defenses typically finish in the top 5, 6, or 7 each year.
So I pulled up the top 10 defenses from DVOA last year. This is not my list. This is how teams finished last season. You could do EPA per play, success rate, a lot of different ways of looking at it. But just in DVOA, which of course accounts for the quality of the opponent, you guys can get those numbers on FTN Fantasy. It was Baltimore, Cleveland, the Jets, the Niners, the Cowboys, the Steelers, the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Patriots, and the Jags, which surprised me. I think the Jags, a lot of that was the first half of the season. I suspect if you looked at the way, I don't have weighted DVOA in front of me, it probably fell off. I think the biggest surprise, certainly Cleveland finishing number 2. We'll talk about them shortly. The Raiders are really the only team from that group where I think going into last season, I did not see that coming at all. And it was, of course, something that really took shape in the second half of last year.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would consider it a prediction of mine for this upcoming year, and I'll be curious to see what you think of it. They were the one, as I look back at last year, I was just like, man, how did we get here? And it felt like kind of a mess of a year for the Raiders. And then you look up and it's just with Max Crosby really just like this level of a player that he just like carried these guys. And obviously Pierce has done some good things. They seem to be way short on talent that you would typically look at and say, oh, this is a top 10 defense in the league. But they got there last year. And, every year there are some anomalies, I would say. And so part of our job is probably trying to find the ones from last year, because we do have those random spikes and then that's carried by like an 8-game stretch of really good play against less than subpar quarterbacks and things like that. But there also then are the ones that, okay, this is the spike that begins the rise of another great defense. And so it feels like just yesterday we were talking about them as one of the more hopeless units in the league, and where they are. And so it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious to see, probably most curious of any team, to see if you have them ranked or what your thoughts on them are.
Yeah, I feel like the second half of this list might be a little spicier and have more disagreement. Okay, so let's get things started. My number one defense, and I'll be curious to see where you have them, is the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I have them fourth, and so not far off from where you had them.
Fourth.
But a little bit lower. Yes, a little bit lower, I'd say. But I still feel pretty strongly about them, so I don't really have like a negative take on your stance because I feel pretty strong about them. But number one is interesting, yeah.
Who do you have one? And so we can talk about. We'll start with the Browns, but then we'll get to who you have one.
I have the Chiefs number one, and I don't know if they finish there per se and like an actual ranking, but I think they have the best defensive coordinator in the NFL. And to me, I have a lot of stock in that, like the stability. Then I know they lose Snead. And like, what's his health status going to be? Does he come back for week one? But it's the deepest. I think they have the deepest cornerback room in the league, and they develop them better than anybody. So I think they can withstand the Snead loss. I love the safety play that they have, getting Brian Cook back from the broken leg. I think Chris Jones is one of the few. There's probably not only a handful of defensive players you put out there, and they change every game. He's back, and he's still playing at such a high level. I think the group around him is actually underrated. And I started last year saying they weren't very good, and then they got to prove me wrong all year. So I just think it's a really good group. I would say the concern I have with them is that I don't see like who's going to take that next leap. McDuffie kind of already did. I don't really like Cook and Bolton and Karlaftis. They're all like good, solid players, but like is FAU going to break out this year? Like I'm just not sure who that guy is that takes them a level above. But I do have them number one just because I value the consistency so much.
I have them sixth.
Ooh,
okay. Which now I'm starting to question. I've had them briefly fifth, and then I was moving it. Okay, great. This is great. So let's talk about the Browns first.
Yeah.
And then we can do the Chiefs second. And then I feel like after that, we're going to have a lot of similar ones in the top five. So Cleveland Browns basically returned everyone. No major losses on that side of the ball. Brought back Zadarius Smith. They added up front. They drafted Mike Hall Jr., defensive tackle. And then at the linebacker position, they added Devin Bush. So you got Bush, probably Jordan Hicks, JOK. Secondary is largely the same. There were some injuries last year, so hopefully you're getting a healthy season out of Grant Delpit, who's a player I remain pretty excited about. I think what's interesting about the Browns is however you slice it, they're best in the NFL, or neck and neck with the Ravens last season. First in QBR, EPA, success rate, yards per play, third down conversion rate, whatever, you name it. It was an interesting defense insofar as it wasn't that interesting. They played a lot of cover one and a lot of man coverage, and they rushed with four, which tends to be a pretty good formula in the NFL if you have players who are good enough to do it. They got pantsed in the playoffs, which was my one hesitation for putting them here, because I think they were pantsed in large part because of the simplicity of their scheme, which was, it was a really interesting season because them and Baltimore had like these two wildly different identities and kind of arrived in the same place, and both had success against the San Francisco 49ers. But I do think you saw in the playoff loss to Houston, which when that offense came out and they said, oh, okay, you're going to do exactly what you've done all season. Great. We're going to break all your rules. We're going to, use a lot of motion and man beaters and all this stuff. But part of the reason why I'm not terribly worried, John, by that one performance is that was year one with Jim Schwartz, who was a defensive coordinator. I have to think that year 2, they're going to be prepared for more offenses to take that sort of approach against them, and they'll have more success with it. And you really couldn't ask for a better talent pool to work with. To me, whether or not they can retain this position comes almost down, obviously health is a factor, but it's almost more about coaching than anything else.
Yeah, and I think this is the Cleveland thing is I also want to see them big stages. Like when I think of who the best is, like I want to see them battle tested a little more, like playoffs, that type of atmosphere. And they weren't certainly the reason that things fell apart for Cleveland. In fact, I would say they probably got further than they ever should have, even being in the playoffs and being able to stay competitive for a half in a game, you know. So I think that there's just a level I want to see them at to really feel as confident in them, I think, in those moments. However, we're talking to battle tested defensive coordinators, right? Who we've known are top dogs for years. We talked about briefly about Spags. Yeah. You could talk about Schwartz in the same breath. I love the fact that he found the best possible ways to use an already great player. I think that's the sign of a great defensive coordinator who doesn't come in and say, oh, Myles Garrett's always been good. Like, we're just going to keep doing everything we do with them, moving him around and finding ways and matchups to get him optimal matchups on every single snap, especially money downs. I thought that was really impressive. He got the most out of Denzel Ward that we've seen. We've seen Ward's career kind of fluctuate, and we knew he was a really good player, but thank God he finally has somebody who gets him back into man coverage schemes and where he's at his best and plays his best ball. They found something in Martin Emerson, even though there may be some limitations ultimately when you have a number one corner, and having another guy who can play competent ball across from him, I think is really big. Delpit has emerged under Schwartz as well. So the player development thing is really encouraging. JOK's improvement has been encouraging, where some of these picks, it wasn't that long ago that we were like, I'm not sure whether these guys are going to be as good as they've been. They've all kind of taken a step under Schwartz, which is really impressive. Honestly, Cleveland is in my tier 1. So like that means to me, I think there's an argument for them to be 1. So I don't necessarily have a lot of negative takes about them. I will say that I'm anxious to see if they can continue playing at this level in this secondary. I think they have good players there. I don't know that I would say their players are amazing there. I'm a big JOK fan. Jordan Hicks just has really struggled to stay healthy, and I do not trust Devin Bush at all if he has to get out there on the field. They don't have a lot at linebacker if something happens there. And so every team's going to have some of those limitations or question marks. I also love that they added Michael Hall Jr. I think he's a great fit for them. Another guy who can plug into the rotation. Not too much will be asked of him as a rookie because they have other bodies there. He should be able to give them exactly what they need in this type of defense. So all the pieces really are there for them to be very good this year. I think at the end of the year, it's just kind of, okay, if I'm ranked number 1, I want a defense that I know I can trust in the big moments in the playoffs. And like, I'm going to take that into consideration. But certainly if you're talking just who could finish top regular season rankings per most of the rankings that we all put a lot of value in, whether it's DVOA or counting stats or PFF grades, whatever you're looking at, I think they could certainly be right up there near the top. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
You know, one area where they did not finish at the top, in fact, they finished dead last in the NFL, was red zone and goal to go efficiency rate. Both goal to go situations, opponents scored 92% of the time on them. Red zone, that was 71%, which is really bad. So on one hand, that's not a super stable metric. So I think they might actually just have some better luck next season. But I do think that reflects, if there is a weakness in this group, they're still not super stout up the spine. You talked about the linebacker group, and then I think defensive tackle. They made a great leap. You remember it was only a year ago that it seemed like anyone could run on that Browns defense. And I think that some of the additions that they've made there have really paid off. But that remains, if I feel like I have like one kind of a little bit of a question mark about them. You know, you mentioned the weaknesses at linebacker. I think that would be it. That said, I just feel like to be that talented at your pass rush and your cornerback position is so rare and so, especially in today's NFL where quarterbacks are getting the ball out so quickly and it's such an RPO centric world. Having cornerbacks, 2 cornerbacks. I mean, you mentioned Emerson. That dude is gigantic, right? And who can just jam dudes, coupled with arguably the best pass rusher in the NFL. That's very, very hard to go up against. But, like I said, that playoff performance, I'm not forgetting it. It's in my mind. It's something I kind of want to dive into a little bit more closer to the season. Maybe I'll get into it a little bit on the AFC North preview. Okay, so you have the Chiefs second. Let's talk about the Chiefs here.
I have to make one more point in favor of your ranking
Okay.
of the number one. So this is a supportive point, despite the fact that they were as bad as you said in the red zone, which is pretty crazy. And like you said, not necessarily the most stable metric. So chances are they'll come back to the law of averages a little bit and regress back to the mean in a good way for them next season. But last year, opponents, 24.8% of their drives ended in a score against the Browns, even though they were terrible in the red zone. So they were letting teams reach the end zone. That is the best mark in the NFL, is 4 percentile points better than the Chiefs were last year, who was the second best team. And one of the points I'm going to use for them. So it really is amazing how good they were between the 20s. When they let teams in the red zone, yes, they had some difficulties there. I tend to think that will regress back to the mean. So will probably some of the other stuff. But I still think ultimately, like, if you're better in the red zone than they've been, I still think that this is going to be a very, very good defense next year.
Let me pull up the Browns schedule really quickly. I'm curious to see. I think they have a pretty difficult week 1 opponent. Okay, they have the Cowboys, Jags, Giants. So not 3 teams that the Texans thing I alluded to, where I'm like, okay, well, what about against, a really like an elite quarterback, brilliant play caller combo? Actually, after the Cowboys, they got the Giants, the Raiders, the Commanders. So not exactly
they don't play quarterback until the end of the season, because all the AFC North games are at the end of the year for some reason.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I am high on the Chiefs. 6 is high, but 1 is much higher. Yes. My entire concern just was about losing Snead, really, honestly. And I think you could absolutely argue that it's overblown. But last year, Chiefs defense, exceptional. I mentioned they were near the top in DVOA, 5th in EPA per play, 8th in success rate, 3rd in pressure rate. Actually, 5th in DVOA against the pass, 27th against the run. That was an issue for them, and I think that's what led to all of the hand-wringing over the Ravens' performance, because it was seen to be such an obvious way to attack this defense. So, L'Jarius Sneed, I think the conversation around, okay, can this unit be even better next year, comes down to a couple things. How important was Sneed to this defense, not just because of his caliber of play? I think we all agree he's an excellent, one of the better cornerbacks, one of the better man corners in the NFL, but also like so much of what they do on the back end. This is obviously a very cover 2 centric defense. They blitz a lot. They do a lot of exotic stuff. How much of that is predicated on having a player like him? So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is, okay, well, how do you feel about the guys that they have in the pipeline? Guys who we have seen. This is not like the thing about all these young players who have confusingly similar sounding names is it's Jalen Watson, Josh Williams, Shamari Connor will be the nickel, I guess. Well, I mean, he's McDuffie. Well, we talk about that too. But also, those are players who have played. So this is not guys coming out of nowhere. This is not entirely speculative, which I suspect is probably a big part of why you feel good about them.
Exactly right. Yeah, they know the scheme. This is not new stuff to them. They can handle the complexities of this. Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams have played a lot. They've played deep into the playoffs. They haven't been exposed. They are not as good as Snead. They are not as versatile as Snead. But I'm really excited about Shamari Connor, a guy who can play some safety. He played in the slot last year. He was able to move around for them. They have done so well with these types of pieces. And last year for him, 86 snaps in the box, 208 snaps at free safety, 145 snaps in the slot. He's a physical tackler too. So it's kind of like the Moneyball approach. We may not be able to replicate Snead, but we can kind of build Snead out of all these other parts and put it all together kind of in that way. Plus you still have another star in McDuffie there who can play inside or outside too. Now you don't have as big of a physical corner. I mean, those other guys are big, but Snead's ability to use his size, I mean, he's one of my favorite players in the league. So his ability to use his size to his advantage without getting flagged as often as some other corners, I think is one of the things that like really was impressive to me. Like the fact that he could be the most physical corner in the league, and he got flagged, but considering how physical he is and how aggressive he is, probably not as much as you remember guys like the old Seahawks corners and things like that. And so I really felt like watching him move on was going to be a blow to them. But then as I thought more about it, I thought, man, this is a team that's developed these guys extremely well. Connor played so well for them last year. They get Brian Cook back. I think they're going to have pieces to be able to be pretty much as successful as they were last year, plus the pass rush you would hope. Now they got to get Emenihu back, and we have to figure out what the timeline is there eventually, because he's such a difference maker for them. I mean, he really is he's a much better player than people realize, and the versatility of a player like him open things up for the others. But getting Mike Dana back, having Karloff this year, hopefully FAU takes another step forward for them, and I think that he can. I mean, he was their first round pick, and nobody even talked about him last year.
Barely played
much. Yeah, he's the one guy I think that I have hope of. Okay, maybe if he jumps to another level, then that adds another element to them in their pass rush. Like if he's Karlaftis year 2 level, then it's like, okay, now this group is really fearsome up front, even without a Menahu, where otherwise they might need a Menahu to get back to 100% this year to be as good as they were. So I'm not saying there aren't questions. I guess I just feel really good about the group that's here. I think they prioritized keeping Drew Tranquil, which was the right move over the other Willie Gay, who they had at free as well. So I think they've just kind of made the right moves. They know the personnel. They're also deep, which I really are something I value a lot too. And they're battle tested. That's another reason why I just feel like, yeah, at the end of the regular season, they may not rank number 1 in every single category. But if you're just talking to who I trust the most in the biggest moments and the biggest stages, I just still feel the most confident in the Chiefs and the most confident in Spags.
Is McDuffie going to play outside more? Because he's so good in the slot. That's something I don't love. I saw some off-season chatter about that. He can play outside, but he's probably about 2 or 3 inches shorter than Snead.
I guess it'll be matchup dependent, but
yeah, probably.
It is a great question for the season, like because Williams and Watson could both start outside and it could be McDuffie inside, but obviously when you're in base, I mean McDuffie played 368 snaps outside and 608 in the slot last year, so he played a lot in the slot for sure. But when you're in base, which the Chiefs love to play with lots,
they play a lot of base. I was about to say, yeah, they're a weird grouping team because they actually play, I think, more dime than nickel.
I think you're right, yeah.
And then they play a lot of base. They're like kind of strange that way. Yeah, that's something I'd like to see play out. I will say one thing statistically that is in their favor, despite the fact that they got pressure at such a high rate and so routinely made quarterbacks' life hell. They didn't come down with the football a lot. They had they ranked 28th in interception rate. So that's something that tends to, they were unlucky when it came to turning quarterbacks over. And that's something I think that could change. They're really good, man. Like Steve Spagnuolo, I think is the best defensive coach in the NFL. That alone, I can't remember who said this, but like the 3 secrets to the Chiefs dynasty: 1, Patrick Mahomes; 2, Andy Reid; 3, the fact that Steve Spagnuolo is just not a head coach, and just stays on the team is like amazing. And I think the front 7 is just so deep. I mean, Gay Jr. is gone and they're still like unbelievably deep at linebacker. They've drafted well there. I really like their makeup up front, and I really loved what I saw from George Karlaftis last season, which I wasn't sure if he would get there, honestly, as a prospect, and he's really impressive.
Yeah, I really was not either, and I am very pleasantly. He has proved me wrong in a lot of ways. He is a better player than I ever thought he would be. So big shout out to George Karlaftis.
Okay, number 2, I've got the Jets.
Okay, I've got the Jets as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I felt like when I watched with the Jets, it was stability. Like that was the big thing to me. Like so they lose Huff and they replace him with immediately, and so it just felt like now Reddick has to show up
right now. He's wearing samurai outfits.
Those situations seem like they always tend to resolve themselves, especially when the team's invested. Like it's always I think it's gonna figure itself out, and I think Reddick's a really good player. I think Franklin Myers trade. I know money wise, they felt like they needed to do that to make it work. And I can't speak to where their future books would be and certainly things like that. But I mean, Reddick's obviously got to be big for them. Jermaine Johnson continuing to take another step, I think, is huge for them. There's not without question marks, but doesn't it feel like they're just pretty stable? Like they've got stable coaching, they've got stable play in the secondary. These guys have played together for a long time. A lot of great defense that we've seen over the years have had stability in the secondary. So I think those are all really big indicators to me is why I really enjoy the Jets. And I think they're going to be a top group again.
It's such a shame that the Jets have been such a circus, and obviously the offense has been so bad that the job I think Robert Saleh's done with this defense has been lost to the sands of time because he's such a good defensive coach. Yeah. I love watching the Jets defensive front in particular. They're such a fascinating group because they're so deep, but there's no superstar edge. Quinnen Williams is probably the biggest star in this group, but it doesn't matter because of the way they play, the games that they run up front. I feel like Saleh has such a great sense of timing in terms of when to dial up pressure and what types of pressures to call. And he's so good at deploying all the various defensive linemen at his disposal. And that, even the Huff Reddick switch, I actually think could end up working out for both sides because of the natures of both defenses and how they're used. Some of that will depend on how Huff plays, and get to that when we talk about the Eagles. In the division preview, they're not in my top 10, but maybe they're in yours. I don't know. But I love that group. I think the linebacker group is awesome. Mosley and Quincy Williams. I mean, really, and then obviously you've got Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed with Michael Carter, Isaiah Oliver's on this team now. Safety is the biggest question mark in the entire group. I guess it'll be Tony Adams and Chuck Clark. It's not, I think because of the way they play, the amount of quarters, they're protected. I do think the secondary is a little fragile. If either of those two starting cornerbacks were to be injured, I think you could see some real issues spring up. But the starting lineup is as good as any in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, they just have really very few question marks, I think, which is why you feel confident with them. And they've also consistently been pretty good, which I think we mentioned at the outset is pretty hard to do defensively in the NFL. You don't see a lot of reasons to doubt why they'd be good again this season, I think. And Saleh, it feels like we spend so much time talking about how, is this guy the right coach for the Jets? And I don't know whether he's going to end up being or not. But, I would sure like to judge him when he actually has, a healthy quarterback or, some of the that he invested in a lot. And I certainly think he's done an amazing job with the defense. And if you have that, I just feel like you have the track record to really improve across the board in a lot of key areas. And so, I mean, I think that this, everybody was kind of jumping on, I was at least jumping on the Jets bandwagon last year, sort of, as saying, I think this team's going to be pretty dangerous. And then obviously it was a disaster season compared to where the expectations were. But I kind of think they actually, you could say what you want about the Zach Wilson thing. They should have gotten a better backup quarterback. Okay, but if my biggest gripe is that team should have gotten a better backup quarterback in case something happened to Aaron Rodgers, I don't know. I just felt like last year they were competitive when they should have been probably one of the worst teams in the league, given the fact that I don't feel like their quarterback and offensive coordinator combination. And a big reason for that was culture of the organization and the belief Saul has instilled in the players. And I think that matters a lot for how they play too. So I just feel like this was easy to put them in the top 3. I felt like it was probably the easiest part of my ranking.
Yeah, pretty remarkable that they finished top 3 in just about every defensive metric alongside the Browns and the Ravens, despite the fact that they were saddled with such a disaster on offense. And obviously they're, ranked very low in time of possession, field position, the things that flow from that. But, it's very hard to keep a defense playing hard with that kind of offense. Yeah, I hear it all the time from my colleagues at NFL Live, what it's like when you're a defensive player playing with a bad quarterback, and the challenge of, sustaining effort and motivation. And he should get some credit for that, But yeah, it's again, everybody's back. I'll be curious to see how some of these young guys look. McDonald, didn't play a ton. You mentioned Jermaine Johnson. I thought he looked good. They're going to need him to be even better. So there's, their first round picks. They brought in Javon Kinlaw on the inside. They're just, it's depth. Solomon Thomas. But I think Quinnen Williams is a superstar, as I alluded to, and worth every penny. So.
And Sauce and Quincy, I mean, they kind of have the trifecta that you want. I mean, that's what happened in San Francisco, right? We're going to talk about them pretty soon, I bet, too. And they've kind of got a star at every level type of thing, and they can rush with 4. They can also be dangerous if you blitz them. They can play lots of different coverages if they need to. They don't necessarily always do that, but they certainly can, and have skilled players to be able to do those things in the secondary. So I just feel like they're a very safe bet. That unit is probably, if we were ranking our most trustworthy units for this upcoming season, I would have the Jets defense pretty high. Just offense, defense, special teams, whatever we were ranking, I would just feel that confidently about them.
Who do you have at 3?
Okay, so 3 is probably where you could convince me maybe to go Browns. I felt like this was spicy. Maybe it doesn't end up being that spicy. I am just head over heels all in on the Houston Texans defense. I love it.
3. Okay, your list
3.
is wild. The Texans made my top 10, and I was like, yeah, they're making the leap.
Oh,
3
I'm being
is
ambitious.
crazy. But not crazy, but
I love it though. I mean, I think they have all the pieces. Like, I
okay,
mean,
let me scroll down to them.
they added Danielle Hunter, right? Where do you have him?
9.
9. Okay, all right. So 6 spots off.
Top 10.
But it's a big difference still. Like 3 is definitely having above the Browns, above. I'm sure we're going to talk about the 49ers, the Ravens.
Yeah.
Like, I just felt like, to me, like, first of all, I think DeMeco Ryan's one of the best defensive minds in the league. I love watching his teams play. I think he understands what works in today's NFL, the types of additions and types of players you have to have, and then he puts those players in positions to succeed. I think I'm rewarding them for going out and adding to what was already a pretty good group. I think Willie Anderson can be a star. Adding Danielle Hunter is a massive, massive upgrade to what they had before, I think, even though I like Greenard. Adding Danico Autry and move the flow into the Raider. That guy's been waiting to play on a contender type of team, and he has been a difference maker his whole career, and I think he will add another piece to what they do up front. So I was a big fan of those additions. I think they're just deeper up front in general. They have a lot of playable guys. So I am a big fan of that because that's how they built successful defense in this style of defense. The track record is in place. I think Al-Shaair, to be able to run their stuff, I think is really key. Guy who has experience in that defense. And Cashman did a good job, but I think there's stability that can come from adding a player like Al-Shaair. I was a big Lassiter fan. I thought he was very good at Georgia. And I think in this scheme specifically, we're not going to be as worried about the fact that he isn't like a top tier testing athlete. I think he plays physical, all skills. His tape's really good. He can play in a bunch of different coverage schemes. Talk about a complicated defense that he played, and he can do a lot of things mentally that will mean he can play right away. And you have Jimmy Ward. I think Jalen Petry's awesome, and I think that this next year is going to be a big breakout year for him. They know how to use that type of player, which is huge as well. So obviously Stingley, if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be awesome. So yeah, I just think they have a lot of great pieces. I think the morale, the buy-in from players, I think everywhere you look across successful defense, we just mentioned with Salah, that is a backbone of that whole operation, right? And last year, the improvements that they made throughout the year, I feel like they're just moving in the right direction. And I'm just trying to be ahead of the trend. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to be ahead of the game.
No, I love it. I put they're in my top 10 for a reason. Lot to discuss there. Obviously took a huge leap last season from the previous season in which they were a bottom 5 unit. Last year, they finished 11th in EPA per play, 9th in success rate, despite the fact that they had a bunch of injuries. Exceptional, arguably the best run defense in the NFL. Led the league in rush yards under expected per carry, despite the fact that they played with a lot of light boxes. Where they were weak last season, explosive plays, play action. I think that was my one hesitation is the secondary. I think the front 7 rocks. If you want to make football Twitter perk up, just say Danico Autry and Aziz Al-Shaair. Those are 2 like football nerds' favorite football players. But I thought Stingley was excellent last season. Talked about him a little bit on the AFC X Factors pod. But Kwame Lassiter, I liked his tape. He's a rookie. I'm not huge, super high in Desmond King. Petry's got to be better than he was last year. He was so interesting to me out the gate at safety. I think that was the one thing holding me back is like, there's just a little bit of speculation on the part of the secondary, but this is a ascending group with stars at all 3 levels. I guess linebacker is kind of a question, but that tackles, that plays hard. And I mean, I feel like probably we should talk more about the Jets, Niners, Texans defensive tree. I don't even know whose tree it is because it was, there's different coaching staffs. But I guess it's Salah's tree.
Yeah, it feels like his.
Yeah.
Because
they're 3 different. They're 3 defenses that all play very similarly. A lot of quarters, cover 3. 4-man rush, don't blitz a lot. I think one thing that I alluded to this with the Jets, and it's something that really struck me watching Houston. And so I just looked it up because I was curious. So there are 3 defenses that don't blitz a lot. The 4 lowest blitz rates in the NFL last year were the Colts won, obviously, but then Houston, San Francisco, or the Jets, pardon me, the Niners and the Texans, lowest blitz rates in the NFL. The 3 teams that got the most pressure in the NFL when they did blitz, the Jets, the Niners, the Texans. I really think those coaches are so good. And this is something I always have loved about watching DeMeco Ryans, because he's never called like a super blitz happy defense, but he seems to always have, I always felt this way watching San Francisco, such a great feel for when to call blitz. And that continued in Houston, as evidenced by those numbers.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's the biggest thing, right? He knows those sorts of things, and they're never going to be reliant on it. And now they don't need to be because of the personnel that they have, which I think is huge. I think that's just one of the biggest offseason changes I think that we've seen, is just that when when a guy they feel very confident in is a great defensive coach, gets the types of players he needs to be able to execute what he wants to execute, I think the results are usually pretty favorable. And I think he's shown ability to adapt as well. But we'll get a bigger sense of that, I think, as the sample size increases. But I mean, last year, probably the biggest hesitation is that if there's an argument against, it's just that last year they weren't a top 10 type of defense. And so I think that there's probably some people that would say, oh, this is too big of a leap. I just think because they're young, it's like more plausible that they do that. I think because they have a lot of pieces that they rely on at all the levels are kind of younger players. And so I think that because of that, with what I see is a lot of upside, I just feel like they're going to get here eventually. And I don't think they're as far away. Like we could talk about a team like the Lions maybe, or things like that. There could be a couple, the Bears, and maybe we'll talk about, maybe not in the top 10, but maybe like on the fringes of, I've seen them in some people's top 10s, perhaps they're in yours. And like, there may be a team where I feel like, oh, they are moving in the right direction. Are they ready to jump in there just yet? And I feel confident about that in the Texans in a way I'm not as confident in with other teams, and that's why I ranked them this high, which is probably crazy, but maybe I should add the.
It's not crazy. I mean, I wouldn't have them over my next 2 or 3 teams, but I did have them in my top 10. Okay, so 3 and 4, I went back and forth a little bit. So I had the Browns and the Jets. You had the Chiefs, Jets, Texans. I had Browns and the Jets, and then my number 3 team, which. And increasingly, as I run this by people, I've encountered some resistance. So I'm curious to see what you think. I'm still very high on the Dallas Cowboys.
That's interesting. I don't know how quite to feel about them. I have them 8th. So okay. Like, I'm ready to. The talent is just too significant. I mean, when you have 2 corners, ball production is fickle, but come on, these guys are like, it's been pretty insane. You lose Quinn. I mean, you still have Parsons here. You still have a lot of talent up front. Like, they were the hardest team to rank for me that I knew was going to be in the top 10. I knew they were going to be in the top 10. Yeah. I didn't know quite where they'd fall in the top 10. Remember, they were atrocious, and obviously the talent levels increased as well. But they were unwatchably bad before Quinn, and then they had Quinn, and it was just like, oh, we're great. And then they got in the big stages, and some of that stuff wasn't quite as dominant as it had been other times. And now I want to see what's going to happen with them, I guess. Like, but I mean, when you have Parsons and some of these guys,
I'm gonna put a little more of that on Micah Parsons, not Dan Quinn.
Yeah.
He's a good coach. Sure. Okay, well, let's start here. There's a couple of things I think that came to mind for me. One of which is that they played as well as they did last year, and they finished near the top of the NFL before, similarly to the Browns collapsing in the postseason. But I found their collapse to be kind of easier to explain. Like, they just ran out of linebackers. And do
they have any now?
Yeah, so now you bring in Eric Kendricks, DeMarvion Overshawn, who was their 3rd round draft pick a couple years ago. Then previous year, he was injured at the beginning of last season and never got to play. I do think that's pretty significant. They drafted another linebacker, Liafu, out of Notre Dame, 3rd round. I don't think he's going to play, but they did make an effort to add some depth there. And then they've got the player returning from injury. They did all that without Trevon Diggs, which is, I mean, they're extremely deep in their secondary. I don't think they're going to play as much dime. I mean, it's literally impossible to play as much dime as they did last year, but they're still a very, very deep unit. the thing that I kind of wanted to highlight though, and then up front, we know Lawrence, Parsons, they drafted Marshawn Neiland, add some depth there. You need Mozzie Smith to play better, but and then Osei Odighizola too is I think a very good football player. Yeah. For me, a lot of the reason why I've got the Cowboys 3 is, and maybe I'll regret this, I think Mike Zimmer is a really good defensive coach, and for all of the, Sturm and Drang around the Cowboys, and it's such an awful, the vibes are so bad around this team this offseason, defensively so, I think that kind of flew under the radar as a really good hire. People remember the end of the Vikings era, but like Mike Zimmer was fired because of the offense guy. And I went back and looked, I was curious, because I remembered how good his defenses were and how interesting they were. And from, 2014 through 2019, they were second in just about every metric: points per game, EPA per play, yards per play, etc. Looked different from obviously how things have looked in Dallas in terms of all the cover one and dime they play, but I think that's kind of a good thing, because I do think this is a unit that needs to evolve. When we think of Mike Zimmer, we think of of course, the simulated pressures that he ran with the linebackers. He always, the famous double A gap blitz. But Dallas has, I think, sort of not lagged the league, but I think could benefit from being a little bit more creative, with how they approach pressure. And so I'm excited to see what he brings to the table as far as a defensive mind, and how he finds ways to get better play out of the linebackers and the defensive tackles. I don't know. I think this could actually end up being an improvement.
I actually agree with that. I think that although Quinn brought like a floor that they didn't have, it does feel like, doesn't it, that they're ready for the next thing. And I don't know about this fit. This is the Cowboys have become the coaching place. Like, these guys come out of retirement, come out of, not being in the league, and it's like, what have they learned? How have they evolved? How have they changed? And Zimmer was always, he was always good. Like, and that's why, I have him 8th, and so I don't believe it's going to be a disaster or anything like that. I just really don't like the linebacker situation at all, and I do think that's an area in the NFL that you can build still a good unit without that. But that is the most, like, every NFL offense is trying to attack that part of a defense, and every NFL defense is like, well, we just don't have enough good ones, so like we're just going to be weak there. And when they can't get one of the top guys, it's like we're just going to be weak there, or we're going to have a guy that at least can run our stuff. And that's the move with Kendricks. What I worry about with Kendricks is just that what if he's just too old? Like, at this point, like, is he just washed? Is he done? And how much is he going to give them at this point in his career? Obviously, at his peak, I love Derrick Kendricks, one of my favorite players. How much, they spent 3rd-round picks the last 2 years on Overshown and Luafau, and do those guys give them anything? Have they hit on those evaluations? I think that's an important part of the conversation there. Clark, same thing, was a 5th-round pick. He's actually probably slated to start over those guys. So they got to get something out of one of those guys that I personally have never seen, and I don't know many people that were like super high on them. And Clark has not been some panacea for them the last couple of years, or the last year. So I still have pretty big question marks with them down the middle of the field, maybe. But ultimately, yeah, I still think this can be a good regular season group. I just wonder if there's eventually going to be the offense that can expose them, the top offenses when they face them. Will they be able to expose them, especially because they are a very opportunistic group in terms of turnover, sacks, and things like that. And when you face some of those cleaner units that don't give them all those opportunities, I think their weak spots will start to bubble up. But they're probably the flashiest group, in which case it's difficult to leave them lower on some of these rankings, because there's going to be weeks and probably stretches of the season.
Amazing.
They look like number one.
Okay, so you had the Chiefs, the Jets, the Texans. Who do you have at number 4?
The Browns
at 4. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then I have, just to revisit, the Browns, the Jets, the Cowboys. At 4, I have the San Francisco 49ers.
Okay. The Niners are 5, so we're pretty close there. Yeah.
It's kind of funny because it's actually really similar to the Jets. I mean, not just in terms of the lineage, but I'm just kind of looking at the group. Pretty much everybody's back. Eric Armstead leaving is a concern I have, especially this is a group that their fatal flaw last year, it wasn't fatal actually, but they struggled against the run, and Armstead was probably one of the better run defenders on the team. They added Leonard Floyd, Chris Matos, Drake Greenlaw starts the season injured. That remains a question for me. The other question, of course, is they're probably going to be starting Renardo Green, who's a rookie cornerback opposite Travarius Ward. But I didn't view that as a negative just because I was like, it's probably not going to work. So what are your feelings about this group? Oh, by the way, you get Hufanga back, who missed the season to injury Talanoa of Hufanga, which is a plus. Oh, and then we've got, of course, the defensive coaching change, promoting Nick Sorensen internally, adding Brandon Staley as some sort of advisor. What do you think about this team? It's funny because we're 4-5. That's kind of how they finished last season. So I think we're kind of betting on them treading water. Is that sort of your feel for this group?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of question marks here. Like, if we're being honest, I don't feel as confident. Like, if they were less question marks, I think, like, in terms of some of the turnover and some of the changes, and I knew something about Nick Sorensen. Like, I think Nick Sorensen's been here, so I think he's seen what's worked. And last year, what didn't? I mean, it did. They were still good, but it just never felt like the Wilkes thing was a good fit. There was all these talks behind the scene. He wants to blitz more. He doesn't want to be, a rush four type of team. Like, he wants to do things his way. He loves to be creative with the guys up front. They want to go 4 down and go. And so I don't know how much of that's true and how much of that's just people like scraping stuff off the surface and calling it a story. I don't really know, but I think Wilkes is a good defensive coordinator. This could be a situation where both groups were good and they just weren't the best fit. And I think that the biggest questions I have really are the Greenlaw injury. So what happens there? Who plugs into that spot? I think Devondre Camp is not a great player, but probably for what they need and convincing someone, hey, come play here until our other star linebacker heals, and then you're going to be playing a lot less. I think he's probably about as good a fit player as they could have hoped for to play next to Fred Warner. You still have stars at all the levels, right? You still have Hargrave and Bosa, and then you have Travarius Ward, I think is a very good player. I think the emergence of Jair Brown last year when Hufanga hurt, like that was a really nice piece for them that came out of that. The guy who can play free safety and actually has a little bit of ball skills and can maybe add a different flavor of player, maybe a little a la Jimmy Ward to their defense, perhaps with a little more opportunistic ability. And remember, that safety class was pretty well looked at as one of the worst. So if he could emerge as even a solid starter from that group, I think that would end up being a really great pick by them. I'm a big fan of Malik Mustafa, who they took in the 4th round. I think he can be a really good player for them as well and add another player to their defense. So there's a lot of pieces I like here, but it's kind of a bet on talent. The loss of Armstead is definitely significant. I think that is probably one of the more under-discussed storylines into the season. I just think he's a really good player. Now, you could say health and age, perhaps that was about to change, and that was maybe he'll go on the decline from here. Either way, though, I don't know that they've adequately filled that role, and so I have question marks. I really want to see what Sorensen does if he's good. He's never called plays, I don't think, in the NFL, and we are talking about Zimmer and Spags and Saleh and all these guys we've protected for years. And now here's a newbie thrown into the midst here. And we there's a lot of unknown, uncertainty. How much is he going to want to make it his thing? You assume that he'll kind of fall in line with what everybody else wants him to do in terms of the top down, but perhaps not. And so there's just a lot more question marks. They could be the best defense in the league, but I have them ranked at 5 just because I just felt a little bit more uncertain.
Yeah, it's funny because it's similar in some ways to how I had the Niners the offense 1, shocker. And I was like, let's pick nits. And I do feel like I'm picking nits a little bit with the Niners defense, but this is what happens when you're really, really good for a really long time is you start losing these players. And also you get a little bit top heavy. But that top, all of their stars who they've paid are worth it. It's Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Fred Warner, and Travarius Ward. Those guys are all in the top 1, 2, or 3 or whatever at their position. That sets a floor for this group. We're really just talking about, okay, the depth, which for this team, when you're talking about a Super Bowl, I mean, there's a reason why literally every Super Bowl podcast, we just talked about Ambry Thomas, because you're looking for those little weaknesses on this team. If Green can be good, then you solve that. Okay, I think a potentially surprising team at 5. You haven't done you've got the Niners at 5, you said?
Yeah,
right?
5.
Okay. So just to recap, you went Chiefs, Jets, Texans, spicily, Browns, and then Niners. So we've all had teams in the top 10 as well.
Yeah.
I went Browns, Jets, Cowboys, Niners. Can you guess my fifth team?
Is it the Bears?
It's not the Bears.
Okay. I didn't know if you were going to be that ambitious or not. You said it's a surprise team, right?
I think people will be surprised by this choice.
Okay. So it's not. Okay. So, is it the Steelers?
No.
Okay. One more guess.
Okay.
Is it the Jaguars?
No.
Okay.
I don't know what the hell the Jaguars are going to be this year. I
don't know.
This might be in your top 10. It is the New England Patriots.
Okay. That they are 10 for me.
Okay. So
that was maybe a little spicy, but yeah, this is very spicy. I would categorize this as peak spiciness.
The New England Patriots last year, despite the fact that they had the most adjusted games lost to injury in the NFL, FTN does adjusted games lost. They lost their best pass rusher, Matthew Judon, rookie cornerback Christian Gonzalez, who looked fantastic. Despite the fact that they had the worst starting field position of any defense, unsurprisingly, in the NFL, still finished 6th overall in success rate, 9th in DVOA. One of the best run defenses in football. One would think that the pass defense, which was still good, will be even better with those players back. The biggest concern is, of course, the loss of the greatest coach in NFL history. But in some ways, for me, this is a bet not just on they were so good last year, despite all of the things that I mentioned, which would suggest that they're going to be better this season, that they're going to get all these players back. But I have to think the fact that the Patriots this entire time believed Gerard Mayo was the successor and nobody else seemed to know on earth suggests that they really believe in the influence he has had on this defense. A defense that I just love to watch because they tackle. And I look at this group and I'm looking at the depth chart and you got players coming back from injury. They brought back Josh Uche for no money. I don't know. I thought signed a very team-friendly deal also with Christian Barmore, who's a really, really good player. They're just a really good group. You could argue they're more super solid, but they're solid all over. And I just feel like their performance last year was so representative of who they are and who they'll continue to be.
Yeah, it's you can't say they're going to fall off that much, in my opinion. Because they get Christian Gonzalez back and they get Matt Judon back, and those might be two of their best two players. Barmore's obviously in that conversation as well. This is actually I've said this for years, and Ollie and I talk about this all the time. He's always like, Patriots are going to be one of the best defenses in the league, and I always say, and I think he ranked them number one going into maybe last year, or something like that along those lines. And I said, who's their best player? And I didn't even necessarily disagree with them. Maybe I was a little lower, but who is their best player? And he was always like, I guess Judon. Now Barmore, Gonzalez, if they can build on what we've seen, we've obviously barely seen Gonzalez. What we saw was really good. They actually might get some star power back here, which has been a while. Gilmore's defensive player of the year season is probably the last time it was there's a true star on this defense. Everybody else we've talked about pretty much has a player either like that or we think is on the trajectory to be that level of player. What Belichick was able to do, despite the fact that his personnel was just a bunch of guys, and I don't say that in a disrespectful way. I just mean on another team, I don't think they would have been as good in terms of the fit. But man, he just was consistently able to get the most out of them. And now Mayo comes in, and you would think, I don't know how much that's actually going to change, to be honest with you, because I am a pretty big believer in his ability to use players successfully. And perhaps in some ways, a lot of his influence will be felt in what he does on the other side of the ball and what the hires he makes there, I think, and the draft picks and what his say in that is. But defensively, yeah, I would expect stability. I would expect consistency. I have them at 10. You could definitely make an argument that they're just good enough and consistent, solid enough. They're also deep, one of the deepest teams. We talked about that with the Chiefs. I do think that's an important thing. A lot of teams will lose a player. I'm going to talk about the Steelers. A little look ahead there, and I think you lose one or two players, and how much does things drop off is always going to be a question mark for certain teams. And with the Patriots, you probably don't worry about that quite as much. They consistently get guys who fit what they do, so you trust kind of the floor to be pretty high for them. So I think they're one of the safer picks just because it'd be so hard to see them in like the bottom half of the league, right? Like even without the Belichick factor, I just think they were still consistently good last year, and they're better this year.
Everything last year was so.
Yeah,
and they still finished as a top 10 defense. You know, and I just and I know the Belichick thing matters, but it wasn't like they were like rolling out like, I mean, he's very famous and appropriately so for his game planning against some of the best offenses in the league. But again, they just tackle.
Right.
I just okay. Yeah, right. Okay, that's our top fives. We've already mentioned some of the teams in the second half. Let's take a quick break, come back, and reveal our 6 through 10 rankings. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. Okay, so we're back. So 6, I had the Chiefs. Have you revealed your 6 yet or no?
I haven't. 6 was the Ravens for me. I mean, we probably both have
7 for me.
Yeah. 7 for you. I think there is some unknown here, and the talent I don't think is – I think this is an appropriate range for them, I would say. Like, and I'm kind of glad we see this one similarly because I think there are a lot of people who put them 1 or 2 just because last year they were in that range. They were 1 or 2 probably. And I don't think – the talent is like unbelievable, and I worry about what that's going to look like. It's like good, clearly, but I wonder what that's going to look like without Mike McDonald. Zach Orr is sort of in the Sorensen category of just being an unknown. Hasn't called defense, I don't believe, in the NFL, unless I'm forgetting a stint somewhere along the line. But I still think he's going to lead toward consistency.
I remember him as a player. I was like, whoa, Zach Orr. Oh my God. We're now that age where it's all these like former kind of like, sort of known veterans who are these coaches, and it's anyways.
Yeah, I mean, he was, and I think they thought he would be a part of that franchise for one of the next great linebackers until that neck issue that he had, obviously. But I think they are a team that I feel like McDonald made sort of in the New England vein, not in terms of the way they play necessarily, but just made the pieces that they had better, and I thought that was a huge part of it. And we've talked about that a little bit at the outset of the show. I think like a lot of these situations, if you lose the key defensive mind behind because almost every defense is solvable if you just do one thing. You may have a good stretch, but the consistently great defenses year after year after year that we have ranked high up there almost always have that great defensive coordinator behind them. And we don't have that. We've seen a track record in San Francisco of guys kind of falling in line with a certain way of doing things and being successful, at least to some degree. Baltimore, I think we've seen enough of that where I feel pretty excited about Zach Orr and the opportunity he's going to get. I think that players who are turned into coaches, I think have an ability, hopefully, to be able to connect with players. We're seeing a bunch of examples of that with this offseason with Mayo and with Pierce, and now with this situation we saw with Ryans last year. And so this is another one, I think, in that vein that you're hoping it turns out that way. And I think that has a chance to happen here. Ultimately, last year, we could read off any statistics from last year's group, and they're going to sound like we have them too low. To me, I worry about the secondary, to be honest with you. Like, I do think that a fall is coming, if it hasn't already, for Marlon Humphrey and the corner group and the injuries he's battled at times. I think they've tried to supplement with some of these picks. I'm not necessarily super crazy about. I wasn't the biggest Nate Wiggins guy. TJ Tampa guy. Marcus Williams is good, but he only kind of does one thing. Obviously, Kyle Hamilton's awesome. So it's a lot of good pieces. They lost Clowney. Do they have a difference-making pass rusher on this team? Maybe Away gets there, and what is this, year 4? I just think there's question marks.
Yeah, the Wiggins point is really important because when I was looking at this depth chart, I thought to myself, Nate Wiggins was a first-round draft pick this year, the corner out of Clemson. For those who haven't watched him, I liked his tape a lot. He's very thin, but he can play man, he can play zone. He's a good athlete. If he's good, I feel like okay, they can be a top 5 unit again. And if he's bad, I feel like they're more likely to be in that the 5 to 10, maybe even a little bit lower range. So a lot does hinge on him. However, that said, 2 things. One, it would be hypocritical of me to talk about the Zach Orr hiring differently from the Gerard Mayo hiring, to a much lesser extent. But they chose Zach Orr, right? There were a lot of guys on this coaching staff who were Anthony Weaver's now the defensive coordinator at the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, they wanted to retain Mike McDonald, but Orr was their choice. So one would assume this is an extraordinarily well-run organization that he was their choice for a good reason. So I'll start there. The other thing is what I talked about this a lot with the Ravens last year. You could tell that the front office worked hand in hand with the coaching staff in terms of how this defense was constructed. Talked about this defense a lot and the Mike McDonald scheme in general, but it's a defense that is reliant. It plays a ton of split safety coverages, a lot of movement, obviously up front in the back end. The spine of the defense being elite is so fundamental to what they're able to do versus having elite pass rushers or corners. And the spine of the defense is still elite. They made choices that reflect that. Madubuike, they paid. You keep Roquan Smith, who you paid. You let Patrick Queen walk. But you drafted Trenton Simpson, who's getting a lot of hype this offseason or buzz. And then, of course, Kyle Hamilton's one of the best safeties in the entire NFL. So I still feel good about it just because they've retained that. And I think players will play better next to those players. But, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of players leaving who gave them a lot of snaps. And then, of course, losing McDonald. So this is one that, I think I need to see it. And I'm very curious to see how Wiggins plays. And I want to see if Zach Orr, if he still has that same touch or, if it looks similar to how it looked last year. So I'll start that. So you had them 7. I have them 6, right?
Actually, I had them 6. Oh, well, I had the Ravens 6. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You had the Ravens 6. I had the Chiefs 6, pardon me, and the Ravens 7. So we don't know who you have 7.
I have the Pittsburgh Steelers 7th. Are they in your top 10?
I have them 8.
Okay.
So far we're 8 for 8.
Yeah, that is true. We haven't had anybody out. We're gonna.
I think I only have one left to reveal because I had the Texans 9th. So my 10th pick is the one I wrestled with the most, and I think you might not have the same team. But so far we are 8 for 8. Okay, so I have the Steelers 8. You had the Steelers 7th. First of all, I mentioned the Steelers last year. I forgot where they finished in DVOA, but they were better at 6th, I think. It was better than I thought. And then when I look back at the numbers, I was like, damn, this defense was a lot better than I thought. I think just because the offense was so gross, I just sort of, a lot of people stopped caring. But when you look at so 5th in success rate, 6th in DVOA. So I looked at when you look at the depth chart, there's some changes. You added Patrick Queen. You drafted Peyton Wilson. Cornerback, Dante Jackson replaces Patrick Peterson. Yep. They signed Cam Sutton, who has domestic violence allegation pending or investigation, pardon me. I don't know if he's going to play or what the deal is with that. It was pretty horrible accusations. And I think that's sort of the extent. Am I leaving anything out, Major?
No, I mean, I think so last year, just to get into what you were saying, remember, Watt was healthy. Hayward was not for much of the year and then came back and played and was playing on one leg, was just not healthy. He was not healthy at all. He couldn't push off the same way. Still was very good. You wouldn't notice necessarily by watching him, especially in run defense. Couldn't push off or explode at all. And he lamented kind of after the year, publicly, privately, all the spaces that he just was not 100% at all. Now there's this contract situation with them. They're going to get that resolved, I think. I mean, this guy is like a pillar of this franchise. So I think that they're going to get that resolved. I think he's back to full health. He's probably the best conditioned defensive lineman in the league, especially with Donald retiring now. Anybody who knows Hayward's work ethic and then watches him on the field, nobody chases down more screens or just passes to any level of the field than Cam Hayward. And so his conditioning is kind of a renowned thing. Getting him back to full strength, I think, is going to be huge. You have Watt and Highsmith, who has just emerged as at least a tier 2 level rusher in the league, which is huge. You add Queen, who I don't think is some panacea again for them, but I would say he and Landon Roberts next to each other is a good combination. And if Holcomb can come back from his injury, which I know there's some question mark about, and Peyton Wilson does anything as that 3rd round pick, which already he has been turning heads a bit in this offseason program, and we'll see obviously we've got a long way to go there, but this is just going to be the best linebacker room and the deepest linebacker room they've had in ages.
It's been a while. It's been bad.
It's been so bad, Mina. It's been so bad. And Roberts played so well last year, but it was just him after Holcomb went down, and so the rest of it was just a revolving door. So I think they've addressed what was a pretty big weakness on the team. I think they're going to be better up front than they were a year ago, and they were already extremely dangerous up front. Benton with another year and JPJ with another year. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. was the reason that this was not a bottom tier defense this upcoming season. Because beginning of the year, they looked that way. JPJ's emergence and the fact that if you're wondering about why those numbers are as good as they are, they played a lot of bad quarterbacks toward the end of the year, which helped with the numbers a lot. But JPJ's emergence was a big reason why this wasn't the worst secondary in the league. And in fact, I think they finished 11th in EPA per dropback by opponents, I think, and they were 6th, I think, or maybe it's higher in dropback success rate by opponents opposing offenses defensively, and their EPA rank was 8th in the league. So every year with Pittsburgh, it's like, despite the fact that Minka barely played last year, and when he played, he was just a shell of himself, wasn't 100%. Hayward's injuries, like they had, I mean, they were starting Patrick Peterson, Levi Wallace, and Dick Casey, Keanu Neal. Like, some of those guys aren't even on a roster, and they were still like finding a way defensively. I don't think they have a ceiling to be an elite group, maybe, unless all 3 of their stars, and maybe 4 if you say Highsmith, stay healthy for full season, which has been a struggle lately. But I think that their floor is just pretty high with Tomlin. It always has been, and I think it probably will be moving forward.
3rd in QBR in man coverage behind Cleveland and Baltimore.
Pretty insane. Dante Jackson and Deshaun Elliott aren't great, and Sutton, like, it's got to be an upgrade over the personnel they put out there last year.
Yeah, my the reason why I didn't have them over 8 was the secondary, the cornerback room. I just don't think it's good after JPJ, who I really like. But the front is awesome. And as you said, there were issues last season. Linebacker room is going to be better.
What do you think of Dante Jackson? Like, to me, that was one of the funniest moves. They coveted him for a while, apparently, and he was a guy coming from the zone heaviest scheme in the league.
Yeah,
he plays a decent amount of man coverage, and he did that early in his career. But I think what does this team want? JPJ's like the biggest corner, and Dante Jackson's like this. Like, what is their prototype? I can't figure it out.
I don't know. With the corners, I have no idea. He's fine. He's kind of a replacement level corner, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought they might draft someone. I don't think they did in any round, unless I missed it.
No,
right?
I don't think so.
I mean, I like their draft a lot. They were one of my favorite drafts of the league.
Yeah.
Peyton Wilson, who I talked about at length in my Combine pod. I like what I saw in the limited sample size from Nick Herbig, by the way. He's like such a cool player.
Yeah. Very good third round.
They're super deep, man, at edge. Listen, when your pass rush is this good and your young players look as good as they have, you're going to be a top 10 defense, regardless of what kind of play you get out of your cornerbacks, especially as long as you have at least one competent corner. If Jackson can play above average, that would potentially push this group up, I think, with better help as well. They're a good group. AFC North is insane. All right. 10. Okay.
Yeah.
I think neither of us have said 10 because we both have revealed our top 9. Can you recap
your top 9? I revealed 10, but not my 10th team.
Oh, you did.
I have the Steelers 7th, Cowboys 8th.
Oh, right.
Team 9th, Patriots 10th.
Wait, who did you have 9th?
Mystery team.
Oh, mystery team. Okay, so you have a mystery team 9th, and I have my mystery team 10th. We're at 10. But I
think you might not ask me back once I tell you who's 9th.
Okay. It's definitely not
you have to reveal your number 10.
No, I'm going to guess yours.
Okay.
Because mine's more of a normie pick that I think a lot of people will quibble with.
Okay.
But it's not like, whoa, shocking.
Okay.
Let me guess yours.
Okay.
The Vikings.
No. I considered them.
The Giants.
No.
It's not the Bears.
It's not the Bears.
Not the Raiders.
Not the Raiders.
Who?
You ready for this? The Jacksonville Jaguars.
Okay, well, I mean, as they were the 10th defense last year, which stunned me.
Oh yeah,
Um,
stunned me. I
are
didn't even know that.
you okay? Let me try to make your case, the case you're gonna make.
Okay,
Ryan Nielsen, man, he's him.
you got it. You got it. I think he's the
Okay,
next really good one.
get into it. I'm gonna
Yeah,
pull up the Jags. I didn't even have their depth chart out because I didn't think they would come.
I think he's the next really good one. I don't think it's easy to step into a situation with personnel that was improved in Atlanta, but limited and get the kind of defensive results that he got with that group. And I think him leaving, I think that was
I'm
one of the
looking at the
great.
secondary right now, and I'm having a hard time getting here.
Look, no doubt, some of the personnel stuff is still rough. However, I think Andre Cisco is a player you can do some things around, especially for this defense, right? He has to the single high stuff you have to be able to do. And I think they're gonna have to figure it out at some of these other positions. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be amazing all the time. And he's gonna have to adjust somewhat to his personnel. But I do think he's finding the types of players. This might be the best potential usage spot for a Darnell Savage, given how the Saints defenses and the great defense Nielsen was a part of have used players like that. I think he has a great sense of what middle of the field defenders are good at and how to use those players effectively. And I think that's one of the biggest competitive advantages of defensive coaching in the NFL is how you use your middle of the field players, how much you have them doing different things, how many different things they can do, what's in their skill set, and how much you can adapt to that skill set, because every great offense is trying to win in that area of the field because it's typically where the defense is weakest. Linebackers coverage, you can stretch them every single way, vertically, horizontally. There's just so much room to play with there on the outside. Why wouldn't you attack there? Because I think he understands that and he has kind of the counter pieces to that. I think that's why they can be successful. They are not great on the outside. It is a concern. I think if they try to play as much man coverage as he's played in the past, it could get ugly, like Old Testament biblical ugly. Like I think it can be nasty like that, I think. But I do think that there are some really impressive. I think he has better pieces than they had last year, right? Allen, Armstead, Walker is probably never going to be worth the number one pick. I still think he's a good player though. Hamilton is back in the mix here. Roy Robertson Harris, I have enjoyed as a role player as well. There are some pieces here. We'll see what happens at linebacker. Foy and Lloyd have 1 week they look great, and the next week we're questioning if they're the guys.
Talk yourself out of this as you explain it. By the way,
I feel good about it. I love Ryan Nielsen, baby, all the way. I'm good. Lock him in, number 9.
I really liked the hire. I like the hire. I don't think the personnel are quite there for the kind of defense that he wants to run based on what we saw, from the Saints in Atlanta. But I think they could be very good against the run. I'll start there. And assuming again, like stylistically, a lot of light boxes, not going to blitz a lot. I think that they have the players up front. I just think on the back end, there's just too many holes, especially at corner. But it's, I mean, if
it's a mystery, but they were 5th in EPA per play defensively last year, 6th against the pass in EPA per dropback, 7th against the run. I'm like, personnel.
The first half of the season they were good and they just melted down. But it's definitely kind of like a Packersy type, like the talent. There's a lot of talent there that if you can develop, especially like the linebackers. We've seen with linebackers too in the NFL. Like sometimes it takes a while. So you've got all these young players. Olukun's already obviously he's played for quite some time and he's sort of the leader of that group. But like Devin Lloyd, maybe the first round draft pick, you saw flashes of better play from him. You could have a year 3 breakout. Same with Walker. I don't know. I can't get there.
Look, it's ambitious for sure. But I think with all of these, you look at last year and you're like, oh, okay. There were always a couple defenses that jump in there that you weren't expecting. And so part of my process, at least, was I'm trying to figure out it's kind of like a game for me. Like if I can figure out what are the things that create successful defense in the NFL to some degree, at least, what are the general things? And I'm going to try to predict a couple of those things happening, a la Nixon's pick. And so that's kind of my process. Like, who's the next guy who understands what modern defense needs to look like in today's NFL and the ability to switch it up, middle of the field personnel defensively, pass rush? I think Nielsen is that guy.
I feel like I am betting on a lot of old. No, that's not true. I had Gerard Mayo. In terms of
last team. Are you
Yeah,
giving me a
I
hint?
kind of give you a hint.
Yeah. Is it the Bears?
No.
Okay. I thought
I do think the Bears will be good. I am concerned about the pass rush. I did a mailbag episode where I talked about some of the regression signs that concern me a little bit.
Mhm.
I think they'll be fine. I just think there was a little bit of smoke and mirrors second half
Yeah.
of last season with turnovers and quarterbacks faced.
Right.
No, I'm going with a coach who I think really showed it. It's weird because it was like a very bizarre season, but I thought it flew under the radar the job he did on this side of the football last year. And that's Sean McDermott. I'm sticking with
Ooh,
the Bills.
interesting. Okay.
This there's two things I would say. This Bills defense last season, as they were, losing players, dropping like flies, I kept saying, this is it. It's over. There's no way they can hold up once, obviously losing Matt Milano was huge. And yet, week after week, I thought they sustained a pretty impressive level of play despite all of those injuries. I thought some of the things he did to compensate for those injuries, particularly in middle of the field, were very impressive. But the other thing is, I think about this Bills unit. The Bills are like the Cowboys in that they're kind of like the bad vibes off season where everybody's there's a lot of panic around them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the people panicking about the Bills did not actually watch the Bills or don't know which players played well last year. That sounds pedantic. I think that they had a lot of name recognition players leave, the loss of whom is not as dramatic as maybe it is perceived, if that makes sense.
Completely agree.
This was an aging defense, and I think they made some difficult but correct choices with regards to the players that they prioritized keeping. So really, it's going to look pretty similar. They do get Matt Milano back, which is huge, obviously. And then they drafted Cole Bishop to play safety next to Taylor Rapp. We'll see. There's still some safeties floating out there in free agency. Like, I think Justin Simmons would be the perfect signing for this team. There's like 3 or 4 safeties still out there, though. I wouldn't be surprised if they grab someone else. But I actually thought Taylor Rapp played pretty good last season. And I think that's why they made that choice. Up front, you got to get Von Miller can't be worse than he was last year, but outside of him, Greg Rousseau's a really good player. He's like slept on. He's not like a superstar, no doubt. But I think like when you look at him, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, AJ Epinesa, still really good players. Linebacker, I think, is going to be better, obviously, with Milano back. And then I feel good about this corner group. Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas. We'll see what happens with Kyrie Lim, Taron Johnson, one of the better nickels in the league. It's still a good depth chart. I don't know. I feel like even like 10 to me is totally fair for this unit.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's totally fair. Totally fair. I mean, you were right. They lost a lot of pieces last year who, in my opinion, were past their point of being like real contributors to this team. And I think that they were names, and so a lot of people reacted. I don't know if they are ready with all the players they currently have here to be able to take that step forward. But I don't think they are like, I would be pretty shocked if they're not in the top 10. I would be pretty shocked if they're not top half of the league. They were one of the teams that I considered as well. I got hung up on the talent question. However, watching some of these guys play last year, knowing they'll get Milano back, which I think is huge, watching Terrell Bernard and some of his development last year, some of his plays he made last year, my jaw dropped a few times with him. Now, it's not consistent, but you see the groundwork of what could be. The way Christian Benford surprised, especially in this system. Cole Bishop was a player I liked a lot. He was my number 2 safety, I believe, after Mustafa in this class. Granted, 2024 safety class is not going to be something we write home about, but I liked Cole Bishop. I like his fit here. Mike Edwards is another depth piece. They have a lot of options in the secondary for sure. I think the ship's probably sailed on Kyrie Elam, and so maybe they're a little bit thin on the outside corner spots. But yeah, Taron Johnson's a great player. He began to be healthy again. What Rasul Douglas we get, he is like the peak kind of corner that fluctuates year to year. And are we going to get the great? We're going to get the one that gets picked on, and I think there's some unknown there. It wouldn't shock me, Mina. It would not shock me. I don't think this is a crazy pick at all. I think they're some of the concerns with them have spread to the whole team, and I think that there are certainly talent that will need to be upgraded before they're a Super Bowl contender again, in my opinion. But I do think that this is still going to be a team that's pretty good, pretty competitive, and pretty tough. And they've never been that bad defensively when he's been there. So I don't think that will start now.
Do you feel like his scheme, because so the reason I said I thought he deserved a lot of credit was, compensating for some of those losses in the way he did, but also he took over the defense, right? They let Leslie Frazier walk, and they sustained like a pretty, I mean, they finished 8th in EPA per play despite the level of injuries. It's a defense like with a very clear identity. They played the most too high of any defense in the league last year. They used a lot of disguise on the back end, not so much on the front end. They play with a lot of light boxes, which again, getting Milano back will be huge in that on that front. Do you feel like that they need to evolve in any way, or did you feel like he did a good job calling defense with the players that he had?
I feel like there may come a time in which they do need to evolve. However, if they had better players, they also may, and I may not feel that way, because ultimately I do think the one thing that he does very well is he's figured out how to control the middle of the field defensively. And I mentioned I've been a consistent kind of theme of mine. I really am. I'm a big believer that the best defensive minds figure out how to take away the middle of the field. He hasn't gotten to the point, maybe it's personnel limitation, I'm not sure, especially with Milano last year. It's probably unfair to totally judge this, where he can do that while also being like super versatile in what he does, where some of the other top guys I think have done that. But I still think that he consistently knows where offenses are going to attack and tries to take that away. It's never like the floor on them has remained pretty high, I think, because he is at that level from an IQ perspective as a football coach. You can maybe quibble about some of the other elements of being head coach that are important with him, but I think that element of it, there's
9/11 analogies. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
although that story came out and then they
took off, so maybe it was back. I don't know. I've heard some weird things in coaching circles before, and you never quite know what buttons need to be pushed. But I would say, that there are elements of just football IQ that I trust him with, which is why I'd say they remain a high floor defense. But at some point you wonder, like, is this going to be a team that, the disguises and stuff make it so they can rely on a lot of what they do, I think, and just continue to play too high, continue to do some of the things they've typically done. But it does feel like at the biggest stages they have gotten figured out at corner specifically. And so you wonder if at some point they're going to need better players than just kind of replacement. Not replacement, well, that's harsh, because some of these guys are actually like solid players. But I mean, for a while, like it was Levi Wallace, then he got exposed. And obviously White wasn't the same player, but 2 years ago he got exposed and it was really rough. And so I think some of that stuff is where, if you're looking for them to evolve as a defense, it might be, okay, we are going to play more man coverage. We're going to get some more talent at this position. We're going to offer something different, and we're going to invest in that spot, because I don't think they've done that for a while.
Well, there you have it. We both did our top 10s. To recap, I had the Browns, Jets, Cowboys, Niners, Patriots, Chiefs, Ravens, Steelers, Texans, Bills. You had the
Chiefs, Jets, Texans, Browns, 49ers, Ravens, Steelers, Cowboys, Jaguars, and
so we went 9 for 10, which is way more than I thought.
Yeah, me too.
So I had 4 teams on the outside looking in, just to touch on them briefly. I talked about the Bears. I still think the Bears will be good, certainly above average, but I do worry about some regression with turnover luck, and they didn't invest in their pass rush. I think the secondary is really good, but I'm still a little bit sus of that front. Do like the linebacker group. The Raiders, I don't think that it was all fool's gold with them, because and they added to that front with Christian Wilkins. I think the front will be really good. I talked about Jack Jones, who's a player that I like. I think Patrick Graham has the potential to be a very good defensive play call. He has been at points, but they're not deep, and I think the secondary, I still have some questions. I have the Giants because of the front. What's going on in the back end, we don't have to talk about, but the front slaps. And then I do like Shane Bowen, who's their new defensive coordinator from Tennessee. And then the 4th team that I had was the Minnesota Vikings, because they got Brian Flores more NFL players. And I think, he took 2 players from the Texans, Cashman and Grenard. I think Van Ginkel was a great addition. Still not loving the corner room, which is why I couldn't put them in the top 10 and I absolutely love Brian Flores. So That one I think is like they'll need probably a corner to emerge for me to feel really good about them. Were there any other teams that you were like, oh, you tried to put in that you didn't?
Yeah, I didn't really rank them outside. I just wrote down some of the ones you said, just to quickly add to what you said. I think the Lions have a lot of talent. They're way more talented than they were a year ago, and they were definitely improving toward the end of the. I mean, other than the secondary was just totally. They were improving up front, I should say. The cornerback room declining rapidly. It was a train wreck at the end of the year. They just have way more talent. I would bet it's another year before they're a top 10 defense, just because how young they are going to be at certain key spots, but. I think that they're getting close, and they're going to be reckoned with in certain games. I think we'll get really excited about them. The Packers have a ton of talent. Is Halfley the guy? I have no clue. So that's rank them. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they're in the top 10, though. They have a lot of talent, and they added McKinney. I think that was a great move. Who knows? Fangio and the Eagles, I don't see it. I don't necessarily believe that right now it's going to be a top 10 thing. They're young at corner, or they need to get younger at corner, however you want to look at it. I mean, they obviously drafted younger. They need to play younger at corner. We'll see what they decide to do with some of their vets there. Slay is the ultimate version of probably what I was describing in Russell Douglas, Russell Douglas, and that Slay ping pongs year to year in terms of whether he's a top corner in the league or just solid. The Bucks, I mean, they are pretty good up front.
Yeah, I was thinking about them.
They're just one of those teams that's like good at some key spots, but they probably aren't good enough on the outside. Yeah, the edge rusher's good enough. Is the corner or the cornerback's good enough? Probably not, but they'll be in the teens somewhere. And they're so good against the run, their rankings will look good no matter where they go.
I really like what I saw at Kansas last year. Too.
Yeah.
He's a good player.
And if the Dolphins got healthy, Anthony Weaver, I'm curious about the Dolphins.
I almost put the Dolphins in that fringe group, but then I looked up when are Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb back, and I couldn't find an answer. So I was like, you know what? I like all the players that they signed. I thought they signed because they were really up against it cap wise, but they brought in, I thought, a lot of really reasonable, including most recently Calais Campbell, who's like still can play. Jordan Brooks, Kendall Fuller. These are all good football players. But yeah, the two top edge rushers, they did obviously add there in the draft, and but that's sort of the question. I'm gonna just kind of wait on that one, but there you have it. I can't believe we finished with 9 out of 10. That's crazy. I'm actually kind of shocked.
I did not expect that.
Okay, so I didn't tell you this beforehand, so I'll go first. In the off season, we do content recommendations. Anything you're watching, you're reading, you're listening to. I'll go first with 2 TV shows that I'm watching. One of which is season 4 of The Boys is out, which is, I don't know if you, it's like one of my favorite shows on television right now. It's ridiculous. I think the season is great. It's only
I have not seen this season, but I watched the first 3, and I will watch this season once it's all out, probably.
I just look forward to it so much. I feel like there's so few shows like that are like legitimately just so entertaining and funny, and so I love that. That's on Amazon Prime. If you guys have never seen it, I think I've talked about it. It's about like superheroes gone bad, basically. And then the other show I'm watching was recommended by my friend Chris Ryan. It's called Presumed Innocent. It's based on the Scott Turow book. Jake Gyllenhaal's in it. It's on Apple. It's like a pulpy crime, double crossing. It reminds me of the show, I don't know if you watched this on HBO, The Night Of, which was another crime show that I absolutely loved. If you've never seen it, it's a miniseries with John Turturro, pardon me. So yeah, you should check that out. Riz Ahmed's in that one too. All right, so those are 2 very not like, they're kind of pulpy type shows, but both of which I love.
Those are good picks. I also have watched The Boys. We'll watch season 4. We'll probably when it all comes out. And then I saw Jake Gyllenhaal is one of my favorite actors, so that is a show I actually have.
Yeah, it's super good.
I have it saved in my thing. My job picks up a ton during the summer, which is why I'm kind of like off the grid right now in terms of my normal podcasting. So if you go check out my stuff and you're like, he hasn't published anything in forever, that's why. So I don't have a ton of time to consume much right now. However, I will shout out, I'm a huge NBA fan, and the Dunked on Prime podcast with Nick Duncan, Amy LaRue. I am massive fans of that podcast. Even as busy as my schedule is right now, I will find time to listen to those guys talk about the NBA, talk about the NBA draft. They break down the X's and O's of the game. They are just really into the nitty gritty stuff. They're very smart. They're also funny, fun guys. So it's a subscriber podcast. There's a free feed too that you get 1 episode a week, but the amount of content they put out that is in depth blows my mind. So if you're an NBA fan, Dunked on Prime is the absolute best. I listen to literally every episode. They produce like 350 episodes a year or something. So I listen to all of them, and they are just the best. So they keep me company in the summer.
The NBA offseason looms.
Yes.
Trade your trade Kevin Durant to the Thunder or something, maybe. You know.
Listen, I would love it. We'll see if they do it. I mean, it'd be a good move for both sides. Come on, Thunder. Do it.
Brutal. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jon Ledyard. As I mentioned, you can catch his work variety of places, but first and foremost, follow him on Twitter at Ledyard Draft NFL. Well, that will do it for this week. We got division preview starting next week. We also are going to be dropping new podcasts on Monday. I won't reveal the premise. It's sort of similar to the War Room pod I did in the draft. That's going to be a series I'm really excited to do. As always, you can check this pod out wherever you get your pods, ad-free on Amazon Music. You can also watch it on youtube.com/@MinaKimes. Please subscribe there, or watch it on TV on ESPN2 or News. Otherwise, thank you as always to the fine folks at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Savecki, Jack Foster, Owen Saylor, Anthony Jimenez, and I will see you guys next week.